In case the thumbnail isn't clear, this video has leaks. Hello ladies and gentlemen. Before Cyrene's V3 drops, I thought I want to talk about Cyrene's identity as a unit and create a discussion around her most unique factor, the region lock buffs. It's one of the most unique things in Star Rail due to the nature of the game's story and balancing, and because of Cyrene, gameplay and lore will now be intertwined with each other. In this video, much like the cast risk global passive, we will be discussing the strengths and weaknesses of this balancing decision, not if Cyrene is any good or not, due to the fine details like how good the buffs are, just the concept of it. Also, we will be going into how bad really is it compared to everything else, and ways they can improve the next character to have this design. Because I don't think Cyrene is really a perfect execution of it, and I don't think they're gonna stop at Cyrene for a gimmick like this. Let's get this show on the road. So first, let's explain what a region lock buff is. Region lock buffs are elements of a kit that are only available to characters of a specific region. Let's say a Belobog character only buffs Belobog characters, a Penacony character only working with Penacony characters, and Cyrene working only with Amphorius characters. I don't want to call it a racist buff because honestly, if a unit got debuffed if they aren't from a certain region, that would be a pretty racist buff, but it's closer to a xenophobic buff. Semantics aside, that's pretty much the entire concept of it. A character that has parts of their kit only work with characters from a certain location, and otherwise would literally never happen. This comes with a lot of caveats that are both good, bad, and indifferent, but also it's not exactly a new concept in practice. So let's talk about the good stuff first in region lock buffs. I think one good part of region lock buffs like this is the thematic nature of it. People heavily underestimate how much a certain theming of character can influence pull behavior, especially among casuals. If you like a certain character with their story, for example, chances are the characters that they interact with are also what you really want to pull for. Having a thematic harmony, with the lack of a better word, is so good for this because you feel rewarded for liking relationships between other characters. Like, for example, having Tiny Herta and Big Herta make an actually good team just makes sense and makes Herta fans really happy about it. Aventurine and Ratio with Topaz being a good team is also very rewarding for IPC fans, and going further, just aesthetically theming characters like Kafka, Black Swan, and High Sealants makes it much easier for a team to be pulled and become accepted. Having characters be close both in story and in combat shouldn't always be adhered to, especially if it's way too detrimental to both or either character's balancing, but it does make it feel rather nice that your team is lore accurate and prevents severe dissonance in gameplay and story. Stuff like Jiaocho, Acheron, or Tribi for anyone that doesn't like child characters, they just want to pull for meta, or Hyacint's Barbie-ass design with Oppenheimer, Blade, and Jing Liu. The only reason why people feel so wish-washy about these stuff is they really want to run, Acheron with someone that's more of her type, not Jiaocho. Again, not required and shouldn't always be followed, but it is a good upside for people that care about it, which is, I think most of the player base really cares about theming characters. On somewhat of a more, substance perspective, having a character be confined to their region is very easy to control and by itself will not cause power creep. With the way HSR formulated story, you can expect that a region locked character can be meta for at least the entire region story patches, which is around 6 to 7 patches, with a few more waning in usage each time. That is perfectly balanced. Even releasing a broken character, if most of their impact is a region lock buff, that means their impact already has a set expiration date that cannot be avoided, unless they do certain methods, which, I will explain later. Point is, you won't ever have to worry about this unit being a must pull forever if you really don't like their kit or their lore, because they are so confined to their region. Whereas with a unit like, Tribi, Robin, or Ron May, for example, their impact in the meta due to their lack of restriction will and has lasted for more than a year at this point, and still being top tiers in value today has really hurt the meta a lot worse. Again, by itself, this gimmick doesn't cause power creep because the progressive evolution of these teams for a unit like this will not exactly be flattering. However, there are obvious problems to this gimmick that you probably are already shouting at me to address, so let me mirror my statements. This gimmick runs into the dissonance with the narrative and balancing decisions. I said it like twice now that theming shouldn't always be followed, and this is the main reason why. Let's say you wanted to buff the character with the region exclusive buff from Belobog, but wait, the story pacing is not ready to introduce this character from Belobog yet, and if we push the issue, they will release with no story or fanfare and end up a mess. Well, that's bad, especially with Star Rail's pace and the overall story. Returning to a planet just to meet a new character and try to make them likable isn't very easy to make sense of and can ruin whatever story pacing they want to go for. I point to you at Rappa for something that went horribly wrong at this. Now let's take Amphorius as the most recent example. It would make absolutely zero sense at this point that there will be more playable Amphorius characters aside from Lygus. If Calypso was one of them, they would have done so already. They hammered it home that each heir is their own main character, and adding another one to the same group just to update Cyrene is especially weird and feels very fake. It's not impossible, just a lot of trouble compared to a normal character getting an update. Even someone like Cyrene, who is a very atypical niche support, she doesn't have to wait for Amphorius to be relevant again just so a new character shows up for her to give a buff to. Cyrene has a better waiting line of a random skill DPS showing up in 4.x, 5.x, 6.x, and so on, and she might get a new DPS upgrade compared to Cyrene, who, we may never go back to Amphorius ever again. And yes, there will still be HP inflation. I said before that the controlled balancing of a gimmick like this by itself will not introduce power creep, but you can definitely still introduce power creep with a gimmick like this. You can release a very strong but niche support like Cyrene, and that will still be justification to raise the DPS bar and make HP inflation a lot worse, just because one of her teams is so absurdly broken that the enemy HP has to catch up to it. So instead of feeling like a balanced and controlled character, Cyrene is strong enough for one specific team that raises the overall average DPS of endgame. What will end up essentially happening is HP inflation is still going up, but the region buff character will fall off in a very predictable fashion, so you just get the worst of both worlds. So this really doesn't stop them from any bad results. The HP inflation is still gonna happen, but with the added bonus of a potentially shorter lifespan character being the one to kick it off. In my personal opinion, the fun of games like HSR is the team building, and being limited in sort of an arbitrary way like this can be really frustrating since there's only a few combinations you can make with a region lock restriction. That's what I initially thought, but if you look at the meta now like I did, this isn't anything special, and let's talk about that. While I did say that Cyrene has a better chance of getting buffed than Cyrene, due to Cyrene having at least a small chance to get better in non-Amphorius patches, this isn't a guarantee. The best example of this is actually Super Break. Super Break is so tuned to their niche that taking them outside of it just leads to very underwhelming results that you wouldn't do it anyway. And because there hasn't been a Super Break buff since we left Penacony, effectively, Super Break is only really worth it within the confines of a region except for Ron May. With the recent leak saying Constance will be a Penacony Break support, even that may not last long. And Super Break isn't even the worst case of this. DOT did not get an actual upgrade for like a year, so characters that don't have a region exclusive buff may as well act like one anyway, or even worse if their archetype is neglected like DOT. Cyrene is not guaranteed to get better over Cyrene, and she could end up being stuck with even less characters than Cyrene is, and wait for a year like DOT. That is very much possible because it already happened to someone else. So really, the effect of region lock buff characters being shafted is just as big of a fear to other archetypes that are so well tuned to their niche. It might sound crazy, but even Caster's teams might get shut out and not get any updates for like a year. Again, look at Firefly. I disliked the concept of these buffs at first because being region locked feels so arbitrary, but in practice it's no different from DOT not getting any buffs just because their damage type is so specific. So if anything, the character releases were already so arbitrary that this is nothing different and can end up better or worse than any other archetype right now. Or I guess, can end up better or worse than any other gimmick right now anyway. Compared to the cast risk global passive, I think this is still a much less destructive, and I actually think this concept is just better. Specifically with how Cyrene does it though. It's cool to have Amphorius characters be bound together by Cyrene, but the magic is that those characters like Anaxa and Mighty still survive without Cyrene, so you don't end up sinking the ship for everyone else just because Cyrene is too restrictive. Having Anaxa or Mighty reliant on Cyrene would be a disaster for their future prospects, so at least they can, they being Anaxa and Mighty can leave to greener pastures, while Cyrene quietly passes by the meta whenever that happens. The global passive from Castris was so fringe that the problem wasn't that it was too strong, but rather the precedent. Starrail couldn't have multiple global passives because it's a snowball rolling down the hill and a lot of things would just be so bad. The easiest option was to not make any more global passives, which, props to them they did, but again I argue why have it exist like that in the first place. I still think the global passive was needless and a mistake. Meanwhile, I think Cyrene's gimmick by itself is more good than harm, and it really doesn't cook the meta in any way that would be any worse than what they are already doing. If you look at the points I made, the balancing of Cyrene is controlled, but it can still be unhealthy, which did happen just like every other team in the game. The only thing unique is the story dissonance, but even then some archetypes like DOT can have less updates more than a story-reliant character like Cyrene. So it's not any better or worse, it's just different. Tribi still cooked the meta even worse. Hyacine is a scar on the sustained power level that will take a long time to heal. Cyrene's impact is very likely not going to be any more severe than those two, and the precedent of characters like Cyrene is only really bad if there's an entire region of her. Like, imagine a region lock buff on Evernight, Castris, and Hyacine. Surely Hoyo hasn't done anything more specific than that, right? Oh, yeah, it already kinda happened with Mono Remembrance and the future of Mono DOT. If I ask you the question that made me contemplate this, would you bet a new Amphorius character for Cyrene first, over a new DPS for Ceredra, or a healer for DOT that actually synergizes with them? Honest question. If it takes you a really long time to answer that question, that means it's not as obnoxious as anything that's already here. With all of that said, let's look at the ways in which this gimmick could be a lot better or not be completely obnoxious. Remember when I said region lock buff characters would be meta, but only for the entire time the region is getting focused on, and will start waning in power after the region loses focus. Well, Cyrene is being released at the end of Amphorius, so that means Cyrene is immediately on her waning phase where she progressively gets weaker. Why this timing? If Cyrene released in 3.0, well, she technically did release in 3.0, but if Cyrene's kit was released at the start of Amphorius, each patch would be a new buff for her, and she progressively keeps catching up. For a customer, it would give me a lot of confidence to know that the character that I'm getting is going to be very useful and keeps getting better for at least the entire region. But again, that's not what happened. Instead, Cyrene's future looks so bleak because you can't see what's in front of her, and you already see most of her kit is behind her. That doesn't really give you a lot of confidence to pull for Cyrene's future, right? I'm not stupid, I do get why they did this. Because of the dissonance of gameplay and lore, releasing Cyrene at the start of Amphorius would be a disaster in the entire lore. And story-wise, it does feel fitting to have Cyrene released at the climax. But again, meta-wise, it's kind of a death wish to be put on this timing. So I do hope the next time they do this, they can have the character at the start or the middle, just so their value doesn't look so bad from the jump. They're gonna have to do some excellent writing for this to work, which, whatever, right? They have $1 billion. Go commission some award-winning scriptwriters or something to do your work better. Whatever, right? But let's set aside the future of 4.x for now. How can you make Cyrene still make use of her gimmick and catch up with current content? Because she is not a perfect execution of this gimmick. Well, first, the way you can buff Cyrene is you can just retcon stuff and release a new character. The entire deal of the Amphorius plotline is the Chrysos heirs being main characters. There's 12 of them, which is a very important number, and the game has hammered it home that now adding another one just feels cheap. Nothing is stopping them from just turning around and saying, well, actually there's a new Flame Chase and there's a new Chrysos heir, even though that doesn't make any sense, and Flame Chase was actually evil in like, a year from now. There really is no blockade from this possibility happening. Just make this shit up and all is well. But there's a lot more ethical ways to do this. The next thing that would be the best for all of us, and something already implemented in the game, is reworks. Maybe a year from now Aglaya gets a buff, and by proxy Cyrene gets a buff. Simple and effective. You don't have to make up and spend budget on a new character. The plot stays consistent. You just update the tools you already have and everyone is happy. With how slow reworks are going, I'm losing my mind and I'm losing hope. But Nova Flare will surely come back, right? The last thing that you could do to upgrade Cyrene is just release more SPs of Amphorius characters. With the slice lineup of 4.x having like 6 SPs, nothing can really stop them from just going like, hey, Mighty wanted to visit the new planet, so he has a new SP to match that planet. Yay, that already happened with March. He's still considered a Chrysos heir, so technically Cyrene should add a new buff for, Mighty's new SP, right? I kinda don't like the concept of SPs like this because they have the infrastructure now to just keep updating their base forms, and adding another one just feels kinda cheap. To be honest, I'm only letting Don Hang slide because he's free, and Evernight is literally a different entity altogether, so at least both of those make sense. Why does Aventurine get an SP other from the fact that we want more money? I don't know, man, it just feels lazy. I can excuse Sparkle because clearly this isn't the real Sparkle, I can excuse Sampo because he was a 4-star at first, so having a 5-star makes a lot of sense for him, but otherwise, stuff like Aventurine and Himiko, why? Just update them, please. My opinion isn't as strong as other people, so I'm not that mad about it. Just really not hot on the idea of having like 50 SPs by the time we have the 5th anniversary. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Cyrene's region lock buffs, or whatever it is. On a fundamental level, I don't think it's any more different than all the niche stuff we already have in the game, and in practice, it's just gonna end up like a lot of them, to be honest. The only downside that I can really think of is the fact that her timing is so weird, first of all, and I really am not looking forward to Amphorius SPs. Just rework them, please. And that's such a pipe dream that I don't really trust them on that. Anyway, that's all. I don't think the region lock buffs are bad by itself. It's not good either. It's not like something that's so excellent that I want it be implemented on everything, because that comes with its own, caveats, but still, it's not exceptionally good. It's not exceptionally bad. It's just different, and I think that's fine enough to add in the game, right? So yeah, that's my entire video. I hope to see you guys later. Like, share, do the algorithm stuff. Join my memberships if you like. Thank you to my members for supporting my channel, and I'll see you when Cyrene's V3 actually drops. Bye!